The rain had soaked through Josephine Hale's coat an hour ago, and now the cold lived in her bones instead of just her skin. She kept walking because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the sound of the deadbolt turning behind her. Her stepfather had not raised his voice. That was the worst part. He had simply set her single duffel bag on the porch, told her she was 23 and old enough to make her own way, and closed the door with the quiet finality of a man closing a ledger. 3 years of tiptoeing around his temper, 3 years of covering for the mother who never spoke up for her, ended in under a minute. She had no plan. She had $41, a phone with a cracked screen and 12% battery, and a road that stretched into darkness on either side. But somewhere past the tree line, past the mile marker that meant nothing to her, iron gates rose out of the mist like something out of a story nobody would believe. She almost kept walking. Instead, her feet turned toward the gates on their own, drawn by the warm light glowing behind tall windows. And that decision would end up mattering more than anything else she had ever done. The gates were not locked. That should have warned her. Nothing about a house that size stayed unlocked by accident. She walked up the long gravel drive anyway, arms wrapped around herself, teeth chattering hard enough to hurt, and she told herself she would only ask to use a phone. She would not stay. She would not be a burden to anyone else the way her stepfather always said she was. The front door opened before she reached it. A man filled the frame, tall enough that he had to angle his shoulders slightly to fit, wearing a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm despite the cold night air. His hair was dark, cut close at the sides, and even from a distance she could see the stillness in him, the way he did not shift his weight or fidget the way normal people did when startled. He looked at her the way a man might look at a stray animal that had wandered onto his land uninvited. Not cruel, just assessing. "You're on private property," he said. His voice was low, even, carrying easily across the gravel. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked on the word. "I saw the lights. I just need to use a phone. I'll go right after." He studied her for a long moment, eyes moving over the soaked coat, the duffel bag clutched like a shield, the way she stood with her spine straight even while she shivered. Whatever he saw made something shift behind his expression, though he did not soften. "Come inside," he said, "before you catch pneumonia on my driveway and I have to explain a dead woman to the county." It was not kindness. She understood that even then. It was practicality wearing kindness's coat, and she was too cold to argue with either. The inside of the house swallowed sound the way expensive things always did. Marble floors, dark wood paneling, a chandelier that probably cost more than every home she had ever lived in combined. She did not gasp. She did not let her eyes go wide with wonder, though a distant part of her noted the cost of everything around her the way she noted the cost of everything, an old habit born from years of counting pennies at grocery store checkouts. "Dante Moretti," the man said, once the door was shut behind them and the storm was reduced to a distant hush against the windows. He said it like a fact, not an introduction, like he expected her to already know it and was simply confirming what she suspected. Josephine Hale. She did not offer a hand. Something about him made handshakes feel like the wrong currency entirely. He led her through the foyer into a kitchen large enough to feed a restaurant, all steel and stone, and gestured toward a chair at the island without a word. She sat because her legs were shaking too hard to stand any longer. "There's a phone in the drawer behind you," he said, already turning away. "Call whoever you need. I have business to attend to." She opened the drawer, found the phone, and stared at it. There was no one to call. Her mother would not answer. Her stepfather had made sure of that. Every friend she'd had in the last 3 years had slowly drifted away under the weight of a household that did not welcome visitors. She set the phone down without dialing. Dante noticed. He noticed everything she would learn, the way other men noticed weather or traffic, background information filed away without effort. He paused in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, and something in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No one to call," he said. It was not a question. "I'll figure something out." She stood, gathering the wet edges of her coat, already calculating how far the nearest town was, and whether $41 would stretch to a bus ticket anywhere that mattered. "Thank you for letting me warm up." "Sit down." 2 words, quiet, but they carried the weight of a command she had no framework for refusing. She sat. Dante crossed the kitchen and opened a cabinet, pulling down a bottle of something amber-colored, pouring 2 fingers into a glass he did not offer her. He drank it standing, watching her the way a man watches weather patterns, trying to determine what was coming. "You walked here," he said, "in this storm. From where?" "Route 9. My stepfather's place is about 4 miles back." She did not elaborate. She did not owe him the details of a life that had nothing to do with him. But he was patient in a way that unsettled her, the kind of patient that came from a man used to getting answers eventually, one way or another. He set the glass down without a sound, which she would later understand was its own kind of statement, and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. "He put you out. Tonight. In this weather." "He said I was old enough." Her voice came out flatter than she intended, the exhaustion finally cracking through the composure she had held on to for 4 miles of dark road. "I don't need his house. I don't need anyone's house." "And yet you're sitting in mine." She had no answer for that. The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of 2 people measuring each other, deciding what the other one might be worth. Josephine had learned long ago that silence in a house could mean many things. In her stepfather's house, it had meant a storm building. Here, in this kitchen with its steel counters, and a man who had not smiled once, it meant something she could not yet name. "There's a room upstairs," Dante said finally, pushing off the counter. "3rd door on the left. You'll stay tonight. Tomorrow you can decide where you're going. But you're not walking Route 9 again in this weather. Not on my watch." "I don't have money to pay you," she said, because pride demanded she say it plainly, rather than accept charity under false pretenses. "I'm not asking for anything permanent." Something almost like amusement crossed his face, there and gone so fast she nearly missed it. "I didn't ask you to pay me anything. Go upstairs, Josephine. There are dry clothes in the closet. Someone left them behind a while ago." She wanted to ask who. She did not. Some instinct told her that question belonged to a version of this house she was not yet allowed to see. She climbed the wide staircase alone, aware of the weight of his gaze following her the entire way, and found the room exactly where he said it would be. It was simple compared to the rest of the house. A bed with dark linens, a small dresser, a window that looked out over grounds she could not fully see in the dark. She changed out of her wet clothes into a soft gray sweater and pants that fit close enough to be usable, and she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before sleep finally pulled her under. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee drifting up through the floorboards, and for one disoriented moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, and with it, a decision. She would thank him. She would find her way to the nearest town, and she would not think about the stillness in his hands or the way his voice had made a command feel almost gentle. She made it as far as the kitchen doorway before her plans changed entirely. 2 men stood near the counter, both wearing dark jackets that did nothing to hide the shape of weapons beneath them, speaking to Dante in low, urgent tones. She caught fragments. A name, Salvatore. A shipment, A word that made the air in the room go cold. Compromised. Dante's expression had transformed overnight. The stillness she had noticed the evening before had sharpened into something harder, something with edges. He noticed her in the doorway instantly, the way he seemed to notice everything, and the two men fell silent, as though a switch had been thrown. Josephine. Her name in his mouth was different than it had been the night before, though she could not say exactly how. Go back upstairs. I heard you, she said, because lying felt pointless, and she had never been good at pretending things she had not seen. Someone's coming for you. The two men exchanged a look that carried real alarm now, not at the threat, but at her knowledge of it. Dante's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something flicker behind his eyes that looked almost like calculation turned inward, a man reassessing a variable he had not accounted for. She's nobody, one of the men said. She wasn't supposed to be here. She's under my roof, Dante said, and something in his tone closed the subject entirely. He turned back to Josephine, and his voice softened by a fraction most people would never have caught, though she caught it. Go upstairs. Lock the door. I'll come for you when it's safe. She did not move immediately. Some part of her, the part that had spent 3 years learning to read danger in the shift of a man's shoulders, understood that whatever was coming was serious enough to matter. Serious enough that a man who had barely known her for 12 hours was choosing to protect her instead of simply putting her back out on Route 9. Josephine. His voice again, low, insistent, and this time she obeyed. She climbed the stairs with her heart hammering, and she locked the door the way he told her to, and she sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the muffled sounds of movement below, footsteps and low voices, and once, briefly, the unmistakable metallic click of a weapon being checked. She had grown up in a house where fear lived quietly, disguised as discipline. This was different. This fear had teeth, and it was not aimed at her, and somehow that made it worse, made her chest tight with an urgency to know what was happening downstairs. An hour passed, then 2. When the knock finally came at her door, she nearly jumped out of her skin. It's me, Dante said through the wood. You can come out. She opened the door to find him leaning against the frame, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up again, a small cut along his knuckles that he did not seem to notice or care about. Whatever had happened downstairs had passed, though the tension in the house had not fully dissolved, humming beneath the surface like a current. What happened? She asked. Nothing that concerns you. I heard a gun. His eyes met hers directly, no evasion in them, no apology either. Then you heard wrong. She knew he was lying. She also knew, with a clarity that surprised her, that pushing the point would accomplish nothing except to make him more careful around her, more distant. She had learned to choose her battles in a house full of tension long before she ever set foot in this one. I should go, she said instead. I've caused enough trouble for one morning. You haven't caused anything. He straightened off the doorframe, and something in his posture shifted, a decision forming behind his eyes that she could not read yet. Come downstairs. You should eat something before you decide anything. She followed him down to the kitchen, where the two men from earlier were gone, and the counters had been wiped clean of whatever tension had lived there an hour before, though she noticed a fine spiderweb crack in the window near the back door that had not been there the night before. Dante caught her looking and said nothing, which told her everything she needed to know about how close whatever had happened had come to touching her too. He set a plate in front of her, eggs and toast, simple food that felt strange coming from a man who lived in a house like this. She ate because her body demanded it, and he sat across from her with his own coffee, watching her with an intensity that should have felt invasive and instead felt oddly grounding. "Where will you go?" he asked, once the silence had stretched long enough that someone had to break it. "I don't know yet." She set down her fork. "Somewhere with work. I was studying to be a chef before things fell apart at home. I can cook, I can clean. I've worked restaurant kitchens since I was 17. Something in his expression changed, subtle but unmistakable, a recalibration she could not fully interpret. "You cook." "I'm good at it," she said, and there was no false modesty in the statement, only fact. "It's the one thing that was always mine. My stepfather hated that I loved it, said it was a waste of time for a girl who should be finding a husband instead of learning knife skills." Dante's jaw tightened at the mention of her stepfather, a reaction so brief she almost missed it, but she did not miss it, and she filed it away the same way she filed away every small detail about people, an old habit from years of needing to read a room before the room turned dangerous. "There's a position open," he said slowly, like the words were forming themselves as he spoke them. "The house needs someone to run the kitchen. The last person left 3 months ago, and no one's replaced her. Room and board included. Fair wage." Josephine's first instinct was suspicion, sharp and immediate. Men did not offer things without wanting something in return. Her stepfather had taught her that lesson through years of small cruelties disguised as generosity. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you walked 4 miles in a storm rather than call for help you didn't have. I know you didn't flinch this morning when men with guns were standing in my kitchen. I know you're not asking me for anything, which, in my experience, is rare." He paused, studying her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Consider it a trial. If you're as good as you say, you'll earn the position. If not, I'll help you find somewhere else to land. But you won't be walking any more roads alone tonight." It was not romantic. It was not even particularly warm. It was practical in the way that his kindness the night before had been practical, wrapped around something colder and more calculated underneath. But it was also, she realized slowly, the first offer anyone had made her in years that did not come attached to strings she could already feel tightening. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." Something that was almost, but not quite, a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Good. Kitchen's yours starting tonight. Don't disappoint me, Josephine." He said her name again, that same different way, and she felt it settle somewhere beneath her ribs before she pushed the feeling away entirely. She had learned better than to trust warmth from dangerous men. She would keep learning that lesson, she told herself, even as some traitorous part of her hoped she would not have to. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Josephine had not expected to find in a house full of armed men and locked doors. She rose early, before the household stirred, and claimed the kitchen as hers, the way she had once claimed the small stove in her mother's cramped apartment, back before her stepfather moved in and made even breathing feel like an imposition. She learned the pantry first, the way she always did in a new kitchen, cataloging what was there and what was missing. And she was surprised to find it stocked with imported olive oil, San Marzano tomatoes, cured meats hanging in a cold room off the back of the kitchen, ingredients that spoke of money, but also, more surprisingly, of care. Someone in this house understood food. She suspected it was not any of the men in dark jackets who came and went through the front door at odd hours. By the second day she had the staff, 3 quiet women who handled cleaning and laundry, eating better than they had in months. Simple things done well, roasted vegetables with real seasoning, bread she baked herself because the store-bought loaves in the pantry tasted like cardboard by comparison. Word traveled fast in a house that size. By the 3rd day, Dante's men were finding excuses to pass through the kitchen at odd hours, drawn by whatever was simmering on the stove. Dante himself kept his distance during the day, disappearing into a study at the far end of the house where men came and went with the kind of careful expressions that told her not to ask questions. But every evening, without fail, he appeared in the kitchen doorway around 8, always alone, always quiet, and watched her work without speaking until she set a plate in front of him. He never thanked her the way other men might have. He simply ate, slowly, deliberately, and something in his shoulders loosened by degrees she doubted he was even aware of. It was on the 5th evening that she made the stew. It had not been planned. She had found a cut of beef in the cold room that was destined for the trash if no one used it soon, and rather than waste it, she had done what she always did when faced with scraps and time. She had built something out of nothing. Onions caramelized slow in butter. The beef browned hard before it ever touched liquid. Red wine reduced until it clung to the back of a spoon. Herbs she'd found growing wild along the edge of the property that morning during one of her rare walks outside. It was a recipe with no name, assembled from instinct and years of hungry nights when she'd had to make very little stretch very far. She did not expect it to matter. She set the bowl in front of Dante the way she set every meal in front of him, without ceremony, and she turned back to the stove to start cleaning, because that was the rhythm they had settled into, her working, him eating in silence, both of them pretending the arrangement was purely professional. She heard him stop moving. When she turned, he was staring down at the bowl, spoon still in his hand, an expression on his face she had not seen there before, something almost raw beneath the careful control he wore like armor every other hour of the day. "Where did you learn to make this?" he asked, and his voice had lost its usual even register. "Nowhere in particular." She wiped her hands on her apron, unsettled by the intensity of his reaction. "I just used what was in the cold room. If it's wrong, I can make something else." "It's not wrong." He set the spoon down carefully, like the bowl in front of him had suddenly become something fragile. "My grandmother used to make something like this, Sunday dinners, before she passed. I haven't tasted anything close to it in 20 years. Josephine did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, watching him carefully as he picked the spoon back up and ate the rest of the bowl in a silence that felt entirely different from his usual quiet. When he finished, he sat for a long moment with his hands folded on the table, looking at nothing in particular, and she recognized the expression because she had worn it herself more times than she could count. Grief, wearing the disguise of stillness. "Tell me about her," Josephine said quietly, surprising herself with the question. "Your grandmother." Dante's eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time since she had arrived in this house, she saw something unguarded pass across his face before he could catch it and put it away again. "She raised me. My father was never around, and my mother died when I was young. My grandmother was the only person who ever made this house feel like a home instead of a headquarters." "What happened to her?" "She got sick. I was 26, already deep enough into this life that I couldn't be there the way I should have been." His voice had gone flat in the way voices go flat when a person is working very hard to keep emotion out of them. "I was in Chicago, handling a problem for the family when she passed. I didn't make it back in time to say goodbye." Josephine understood, with sudden clarity, that this was the wound beneath the stillness, the thing that made a man build a fortress out of silence and control. She did not offer platitudes. She had learned long ago that platitudes were for people who had never actually lost anything. "I'm sorry," she said instead, simply, and something in the way she said it seemed to land differently than sympathy usually landed on him, because his jaw tightened and he looked away toward the window for a moment before looking back. You didn't know her. You don't need to apologize for something that isn't yours to carry." "I'm not apologizing for her death," Josephine said. "I'm apologizing that you had to carry it alone." The silence that followed stretched long enough that she thought she had overstepped, said something too intimate for the careful distance they had maintained since her arrival. But Dante did not pull back. Instead, he studied her with an expression she could not fully name, something between surprise and recognition, as though she had said something true that he had not expected anyone in his orbit to understand. "Nobody says things like that to me," he said finally. "Usually, people either fear me too much to speak honestly, or they want something badly enough that honesty becomes inconvenient." "I don't want anything from you," she said, and meant it. "I just didn't want you sitting there thinking you had to grieve alone in a room I was standing in." He rose from the table then, taking his empty bowl to the sink himself, an act so small it should not have mattered, and mattered enormously anyway. A man who commanded armed soldiers choosing to carry his own dish, because something about the moment had shifted the ground beneath him. He paused beside her at the sink, close enough that she caught the scent of cedar and something darker underneath. Gunpowder, maybe, or simply the weight of the life he led. "Thank you," he said, "for the stew, and for not looking at me like I'm something to be handled." He left the kitchen without waiting for a response, and Josephine stood at the sink for a long time after he was gone, her heart doing something complicated and unfamiliar in her chest, something she refused to name because naming it felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with the men in dark jackets who patrolled the grounds outside. The weeks that followed built something between them that neither of them acknowledged out loud, though both of them felt its weight growing heavier by the day. Dante began arriving in the kitchen earlier, sometimes staying to talk while she cooked, instead of simply eating in silence and leaving. He asked her questions about her life before the house, about the restaurant kitchens she'd worked, about the stepfather who had thrown her out into a storm without a second thought. And she found herself answering honestly, in a way she had not answered anyone in years. She learned things about him too, fragments offered carefully, like a man testing whether the ground beneath a confession could hold his weight. He told her about the oath he had taken at 22, the responsibility that had settled onto his shoulders when his father died and left him a seat at a table he had never wanted. He told her about the loyalty that ran through the family like blood, absolute and unquestioned. The kind of loyalty that had cost him relationships, cost him softness, cost him the version of himself that might have existed in a different life. He never apologized for what he was. She noticed that immediately, and respected it more than she expected to. He did not perform contrition for a life he had not chosen, but had also not walked away from when the chance might have existed. He simply told her the truth of it, plainly, and let her decide what to do with the knowledge. She stayed. It was not naive of her. She understood exactly what kind of danger lived under this roof, had seen the guns and heard the low, urgent conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. But she had also seen the way Dante's soldiers treated the household staff with genuine respect, the way he paid fair wages and settled disputes among his men with something closer to justice than cruelty. This was not a fairy tale. It was a complicated, dangerous world with its own code, and she was choosing, with open eyes, to remain inside it. The tension between them built in small moments that neither of them named. His hand brushing hers when he reached for a plate. The way he watched her across the kitchen with an intensity that made her skin warm even from a distance. The night she caught him staring at her from the doorway, and instead of looking away when she noticed, he held her gaze for 3 full seconds before finally breaking it. A silent admission neither of them was ready to speak aloud. she began to notice things about him she knew she should not be noticing. The particular way his forearms tensed when he was angry, but controlling it. The low rasp his voice took on late in the evening, when the house had gone quiet and it was just the two of them in the kitchen, the rest of the household asleep. The scar along his ribs she glimpsed once, when his shirt rode up as he reached for something on a high shelf, and the way he caught her looking and did not explain it, only held her gaze until she looked away first. She was falling into something dangerous, and she knew it, and she did nothing to stop it, because some part of her had decided this house, this man, this fragile and uncertain arrangement felt more like home than anything she had known in years. The threat arrived on a Tuesday, though Josephine would not learn the exact reason until much later. She noticed the shift in the household first, the way it always seemed to happen, a tightening in the air that preceded violence, the way pressure builds before a storm. Dante's men moved through the halls with sharper urgency, conversations dropping to whispers whenever she entered a room, and Dante himself disappeared into his study for hours at a stretch, emerging only long enough to eat whatever she set in front of him before vanishing again. She cornered him on the third day of this pattern, refusing to let him retreat back into his study without an answer. "Something's wrong," she said, blocking the doorway with a stubbornness that surprised even her. "You've barely slept. Your men look like they're waiting for something to explode." "It's family business," Dante said, the careful evenness back in his voice. The wall she had watched come down over the past weeks, rebuilding itself brick by brick. "It doesn't concern you." "I live here now," she said. "It concerns me whether you want it to or not." Something flickered behind his eyes, frustration and something softer tangled together. He ran a hand through his hair, an uncharacteristic gesture of exhaustion she had never seen from him before, and finally, reluctantly, he told her. A man named Salvatore Greco, once a trusted capo in Dante's own family, had been feeding information to a rival organization for the better part of a year. The betrayal had already cost Dante 2 of his men, ambushed at a warehouse that Salvatore had reported clear. Now Salvatore had disappeared entirely, and with him, knowledge of every safe house, every routine, every vulnerability in Dante's operation. "He knows this house," Dante said quietly. "He knows the kitchen staff's schedule. He knows you're here." Josephine felt something cold settle in her stomach, but she did not let it show on her face, a skill she had perfected over years of hiding fear from a stepfather who fed on it. "Then we prepare. What do you need from me?" Dante's expression shifted into something she had not seen before, surprise layered over something that looked almost like admiration. "Most people in your position would be asking me to send them somewhere safe." "I'm not most people," she said simply, "and I'm not leaving." He studied her for a long moment, and something passed between them in that silence, an understanding neither of them had words for yet. "I need you to know the escape routes through the house, the panic room off the wine cellar. I need you to know how to reach it in under 30 seconds from anywhere on the ground floor." "Show me," she said, and he did, walking her through the house room by room, his hand occasionally finding the small of her back to guide her direction, a touch that sent heat through her, even in the middle of planning for potential violence. By the end of the walkthrough, she knew the house better than most of his own men, and something in Dante's expression told her this fact had not gone unnoticed. That night, after the household had gone quiet, Josephine found herself unable to sleep, her mind circling the danger that had settled over the house like a held breath. She made her way down to the kitchen, needing the familiar comfort of a task her hands knew how to do, and found Dante already there, sitting alone at the island with a glass of something amber-colored in front of him, untouched. "Can't sleep either," she said, more statement than question, moving to the stove to start warming milk out of habit rather than hunger. "I don't sleep much when there's a threat active," he admitted, watching her move through the kitchen with an intensity that had become familiar over the past weeks. Too many years of learning that comfort gets people killed. She poured the warmed milk into 2 mugs, added a measure of honey and cinnamon the way her grandmother had taught her before she died, and set one in front of him without asking whether he wanted it. He wrapped his hands around the mug, and something in the gesture, this powerful man holding a simple cup of warm milk like it was a lifeline, undid something in her chest she had been carefully guarding. "You should be afraid of me," Dante said suddenly, staring into the mug rather than at her. "Of what I am, what I've done, what I'll do to protect this family and everyone in it." "I've seen what you are," Josephine said quietly. "I've also seen what you do for the people who depend on you. Both things can be true at once." "That's not an answer to what I asked." "I'm not afraid of you," she said, and the words came out steadier than she expected. "I'm afraid of what's coming for you." "That's different." Dante set the mug down and looked at her directly, the careful distance he usually maintained stripped away by exhaustion and the weight of an old betrayal still bleeding beneath the surface. "You should be smarter than this, Josephine. You should have taken the money I offered to send you somewhere safe." "I don't want your money," she said. "I want to stay." The silence that fell between them was different from every silence that had come before it, charged with something neither of them had allowed themselves to acknowledge directly until this exact moment. Dante rose from his stool slowly, and for the first time since she had met him, she watched the careful control slip from his expression entirely, replaced by something raw and unguarded and hungry. "I told myself I wouldn't do this," he said, his voice rough. "Not while there's a target on this house. Not while I can't promise you anything except danger." "I didn't ask for promises," Josephine said, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating off him. "I asked to stay." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch careful in a way that contrasted violently with everything else she knew about him, the violence his hands were capable of, the control he wielded over an entire criminal empire. "If you stay, it won't be simple. It won't be safe. Everything about this life will try to take you from me eventually." "Then we'll deal with that when it comes," she said. "I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking for real." He kissed her then, finally, after weeks of charged silences and careful distances, and it was nothing like the gentle romance she might have imagined in another life. It was desperate and certain all at once, his hand cradling the back of her head like she was something precious he could not afford to lose. And she felt the decision settle into her bones with a certainty she had not expected to feel about anything in this house, in this life, in this dangerous man who had taken her in on a stormy night and given her something that felt, impossibly, like home. When they finally broke apart, Dante rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteady in a way she suspected he rarely allowed himself to be. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Salvatore will use anything against me. If he learns what you mean to me now, he'll come for you directly." "Then let him come," Josephine said, and meant it, though her heart hammered at the reality of the threat now sitting squarely between them. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days later, Salvatore Greco made his move, and it was worse than either of them had prepared for. Josephine had gone into town for supplies, a trip she had made a dozen times before without incident, always accompanied by one of Dante's men as a precaution neither of them discussed openly. This time, it was a soldier named Rocco, quiet and watchful, walking a half step behind her through the market as she selected vegetables for that evening's dinner. She noticed the man watching them before Rocco did, a detail that would matter later, though in the moment it registered only as an itch of unease along the back of her neck. He was unremarkable in every way that mattered: average height, forgettable clothing, the kind of face designed to disappear into a crowd. But his eyes tracked her too precisely, too deliberately, for an ordinary stranger's curiosity. "Rocco," she said quietly, keeping her voice level. "The man by the fruit stand. He's been watching us since we arrived." Rocco's posture shifted immediately, years of training kicking in without visible panic, his hand drifting casually toward the inside of his jacket. "Stay close to me. We're leaving. Now." They made it 3 steps before the man moved, and Josephine understood in that instant that this had never been about watching. It had been about waiting for the right moment, and the crowded market, with its narrow aisles and distracted shoppers, had provided exactly that. The man grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, yanking her away from Rocco with a strength that spoke of violence as a practiced skill rather than a desperate improvisation. Rocco reacted instantly, weapon half drawn, before a second man appeared from behind a produce stall and struck him hard across the temple with something metal, dropping him to the pavement in a spray of blood that sent the surrounding shoppers screaming and scattering. Josephine did not scream. She had learned long ago that screaming accomplished nothing except announcing weakness to a predator already committed to violence. Instead, she drove her elbow back hard into the man's ribs, felt him grunt and loosen his grip by a fraction, and used that fraction to twist free and grab the nearest thing her hands could find: a heavy glass jar of preserved peppers from the stall beside her. She swung it hard into the side of his head. Glass shattered, the man staggered, and she did not wait to see if he recovered before she was running, weaving between overturned stalls and panicked shoppers, her heart slamming against her ribs as she searched desperately for any path back toward Rocco. She found him struggling to his feet, blood running from a gash above his eyebrow, weapon finally free in his hand, and together they moved toward the car at a dead run while the second attacker shouted something behind them that she did not catch and did not care to understand. They made it to the car. Rocco drove them back to the estate at a speed that pinned Josephine against her seat, one hand pressed to his bleeding temple, the other white-knuckled on the wheel, and by the time they reached the gates, Dante was already standing in the drive, having been alerted the moment Rocco's emergency call came through. He crossed the gravel before the car had fully stopped, pulling her door open and pulling her into his arms with a force that spoke of fear finally breaking through years of careful control. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, hands moving over her arms, her face, checking for injuries she did not have. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook with adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Rocco needs a doctor. He took a hit protecting me." Dante's jaw was carved from stone, fury radiating off him in waves that made even his own men give him a wide berth as he barked orders. Doctors summoned, security doubled, the entire estate locked down within minutes. But underneath the fury, Josephine saw something else entirely, a fear so raw it had stripped away every layer of the careful control he wore like armor. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said, once Rocco had been taken inside and the immediate chaos had settled into tense preparation. "Salvatore knows what you mean to me now. He's using you to reach me." "I fought him off," Josephine said. "I'm not helpless, Dante. I'm not going to hide in a room and wait for you to fix this. You could have died today." His voice cracked on the words, an admission of vulnerability that cost him visibly. "Do you understand what that would have done to me?" "I understand," she said quietly, reaching up to cup his face, forcing him to look at her rather than at the danger circling them both. "I understand because I feel the same way about you. That's what this is, Dante. That's what we chose." He pulled her against his chest, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering beneath the fabric of his shirt. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply standing together in the aftermath of violence that had come too close to taking everything from them both. "I'm ending this," he said finally, his voice dropping into something colder and more certain than she had heard from him before. "Tonight, Salvatore doesn't get to threaten what's mine and walk away breathing." Josephine understood in that moment that she had just witnessed the line between the man who brought her warm milk in the middle of the night and the man capable of running a criminal empire finally collapse into a single, unified truth. Both were real. Both were him. And she had chosen this man fully, with every dangerous edge intact. "Let me help," she said. Dante's eyes snapped to hers, something between disbelief and reluctant respect crossing his features. "This isn't a kitchen, Josephine. This is my world. It's not safe." "I know it's not safe. I'm not asking you to hand me a weapon and send me into a warehouse." She held his gaze steadily. "But I heard things today. That man wasn't working alone, and he wasn't improvising. He knew our route, our timing. Someone in this house told him." The color drained slightly from Dante's face as the implication settled. A leak inside his own walls. Someone close enough to know Josephine's schedule down to the hour. His mind, she could see, was already working through the household staff, the security rotation, the small circle of people who would have had access to that information. "Who," he said quietly, "would have known you were going to the market today?" Josephine thought back carefully, replaying the morning in her mind. "I mentioned it to Marco while he was bringing in deliveries, and to one of the housekeepers, Renata, when she asked what I needed for dinner." Dante's expression hardened into something dangerous and focused. "Marco has been with the family 8 years. I'd trust him with my life." He paused. "Renata joined 3 months ago. Around the same time Salvatore started feeding information to the Castellanos." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Josephine felt her stomach drop as she thought back over the past months, small moments that had meant nothing at the time and now took on a different weight. Renata always seeming to know exactly where Josephine would be. Renata asking careful, casual questions about the household routines that Josephine had answered without thinking twice. "We need proof," Josephine said. "Before you do anything, if we're wrong about her, it could tear this family apart from the inside for nothing." Dante's men found the proof within hours, a burner phone hidden in Renata's quarters with a log of calls to a number they traced back to one of Salvatore's known associates. The woman did not deny it when confronted, only stared at Dante with a mixture of defiance and fear that told Josephine everything about how deep Salvatore's reach into desperate, frightened people truly ran. Renata had a sister, it turned out, held somewhere by the Castellano family as leverage, and she had traded information for promises that her sister would be released once Salvatore's plans succeeded. It was not an excuse Dante accepted, but it was information he used, extracting the location of Salvatore's current safe house before turning the matter over to his own justice, the details of which Josephine did not ask to know, and Dante did not offer to share. That night, as the household settled into a tense and watchful quiet, Dante found Josephine in the kitchen once more, standing at the counter with her hands pressed flat against the cool stone, trying to steady the tremor that had not fully left her since the market. "I have to go tonight," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Salvatore has to be dealt with personally. If I don't end this myself, he'll keep coming, again and again, until one of these attempts succeeds." Josephine turned to face him, fear tightening in her chest at the thought of him walking into danger while she waited helplessly behind. "Let me come with you," Absolutely not. His voice left no room for negotiation. This isn't a kitchen, and it isn't a market stall you can defend with a jar of peppers. This is the part of my world I never wanted you to see up close. I'm not asking to hold a weapon, Dante. I'm asking not to be left in the dark, not knowing if you're alive. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she hated the crack in her composure, even as she let it show, because pretending to be unaffected felt like a lie she no longer wanted to tell him. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead with a tenderness that contrasted violently with the coldness in his eyes when he spoke of Salvatore. I will come back to you, I promise you that, but I need you here, safe, so I'm not distracted by fear for you while I handle this. She hated the logic even as she understood it, and she nodded against his chest, memorizing the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart, in case this was the last time she got to feel it. Dante left an hour after midnight with 4 of his most trusted men, and Josephine sat in the dark kitchen alone, unable to sleep, unable to eat, counting the minutes with a dread that settled deep into her chest. She thought about her stepfather's house, the quiet cruelty that had shaped her into someone who braced for disaster as a matter of habit, and she thought about how strange it was that the danger she felt now came wrapped around something she wanted desperately to protect rather than escape. Dawn broke without word. Josephine paced the length of the kitchen so many times she lost count, and when the sound of cars finally crunched up the gravel drive around 6 in the morning, she was at the front door before anyone could stop her. Dante emerged from the lead car with a fresh cut along his jaw and blood on his shirt that was not entirely his own, but he was standing, breathing, alive, and the moment his eyes found her across the drive, something in his exhausted expression eased into relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees. She crossed the distance between them at a run, and he caught her against his chest with both arms, holding her the way a man holds something he had genuinely feared losing. It's done, he said quietly into her hair. Salvatore won't threaten this family again, won't threaten you again. Josephine pulled back just far enough to look at him, at the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, and she reached up to touch the cut along his jaw with careful fingers. You're hurt. It's nothing. He caught her hand before she could examine the wound further, pressing a kiss to her palm instead. I need you to know something, Josephine. Last night, walking into that building, the only thought in my head was getting back here, to you, not to the family, not to the business, to you. I know, she said softly. I felt the same thing waiting for you. He led her inside, and the house that had felt like a held breath for weeks finally seemed to exhale around them. The tension of Salvatore's betrayal and the danger that had followed finally lifted from every corner of every room. Dante's men moved through the halls with the loose, easy postures of soldiers finally allowed to stand down, and somewhere in the kitchen, Josephine could smell coffee brewing, ordinary and grounding after a night that had felt anything but. Later that morning, once Dante had washed and changed and the immediate business of the aftermath had been handled by men who knew their roles without needing instruction, he found Josephine in the kitchen again, exactly where he always found her, exactly where she had chosen to be. I have something to say to you, he said, and something in his tone made her set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables for the evening meal, giving him her full attention. You told me, the night you arrived, that you didn't need anyone's house, that you'd figure things out on your own. I remember, she said. I don't want you here because you have nowhere else to go anymore, Dante said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I want you here because this house isn't a home to me without you in it. It wasn't before you came. I didn't understand what it was missing until you filled it. Josephine felt something in her chest crack open, warm and terrifying all at once, and she crossed the kitchen to stand in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough to see every flicker of emotion he no longer bothered to hide from her. "When I walked up that driveway," she said, "I thought I was asking for shelter for one night. I didn't know I was asking for a home." "You made it one," Dante said, reaching up to brush his thumb along her jaw. "The night you made that stew, I tasted something I hadn't tasted in 20 years. Not just the food, the feeling of belonging somewhere. You gave me that back." "Let me stay," Josephine said quietly, echoing the words that had first brought her to his door, though this time they meant something entirely different than a plea for temporary shelter. "Let me stay, and I'll make this a home. Not just for tonight, for as long as you'll have me." Dante's answer was not spoken in words. He kissed her slowly, deliberately, a promise made without the fragility of a spoken vow, and when they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers the way he had the night everything between them changed. "You're not staying because you have nowhere else to go," he said quietly. "You're staying because this is where you belong, where you've always belonged, even before either of us knew it." Outside, the estate had returned to its usual quiet rhythm. Soldiers at their posts, staff moving through their routines, the machinery of a dangerous world continuing to turn the way it always had. But inside the kitchen, wrapped in the arms of a man who had once frightened her and now felt like the safest place she had ever known, Josephine understood that she had not simply survived the storm that brought her to his door. She had found, at the end of that long and lonely road, exactly the home she had never known she was looking for.